Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session in which we will reframe how we should really be thinking about our supplier portals and demonstrate a strategy that has the potential to deliver a tenfold improvement in adoption and engagement, as well as many other hard business outcomes, all based on examples that we have seen with our own customers. But just to introduce ourselves, first of all, I'm Duncan Clark, Director of Product Marketing at HICX. And joining me is Phil Pandal, Head of Solution Consulting, who will take us through the demonstration a little later on in this session. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the agenda. First, we'll define what a supplier portal strategy actually is, why it is frequently misunderstood, and how it links to business outcomes. Then we'll dig into why supplier portal strategy matters and how to take that all-important strategic approach. After that, Phil will show you a real example of how a fit-for-purpose portal can be deployed and used for various different use cases. And finally, we'll leave you with a 5-step roadmap to start executing this within your business. Okay, so what do we mean by supplier portal strategy? We'll start with what it is not. We are not referring here to a collection of portals, nor a technology shopping list whereby we have perhaps the unintended consequence, but a consequence nonetheless, of pushing the burden of the complex tech landscape to the supplier. We're also not referring to a supplier network portal, which of course that comes into play because we all hate the idea of suppliers doing things multiple times, in which case we think, well, wouldn't it be great to create a singular network where every supplier would go in and just do their data and info in there? The problem with a single network solution is that supply chain management is just too vast an area for any one company to be able to cover all use cases. It is akin to saying, because we have LinkedIn, we don't need an HR portal. So instead, we need to think of it like other portals in the business. Think of it more like a customer portal, which offers customer self-service, or an HR portal, where in the case of these types of portals, it is unique to you and no other company. Thus, today's supplier portals and what we may consider strategy are actually typically deployed for tactical reasons, and the solutions that we have tried fall firmly into the tactical bucket. So if it is not that, what is it? Instead, we need to think of supplier portal strategy as a deliberate, enterprise-wide plan for how one digital front door will advance your core business goals: supplier experience, data quality, risk visibility, and cost efficiency over multiple years. When we think of it in the correct way, we realize that what we're talking about is a roadmap that links the portal's capabilities, processes, and metrics to measurable P&L outcomes, and we can see why some of the solutions we have tried in the past haven't delivered us the results we wanted. And so now for supplier portal, we have a very precise definition here, and our supplier portal strategy is therefore molded around this idea of establishing what we could refer to as a portal of portals, and then how to realize business value from that. Now, of course, this deserves some closer elaboration, particularly around that business value piece. With that in mind, let's now dig into the definition of strategy in this sense a little more deeply. Now, a supplier portal strategy will address multiple dimensions, and we'll take each one in turn and consider what a strategic view of that looks like compared to the more prevalent approach we more commonly see, which tends to be tactical. So to start us off, the North Star outcome, which we already mentioned, the headline is a strategic approach hinges on measurable business outcomes, which we define. And we'll come back to how we might articulate those specific outcomes as goals or KPIs in a moment. But if we contrast it with what we more commonly see in the absence of strategy, in this scenario, it's a growing number of portals that are simply acquired or accumulated, let's say, based on an identified missing feature or capability. And in such circumstances, you'll hear phrases like, we need a portal for invoices, for example, or any variation of that from various different functions across the business. All right, now moving on to the supplier experience aspect. And here we see that in the strategic approach, our aim is to have one global task-driven portal that federates to underlying tools and systems, but that provides suppliers the one face of the company. It's difficult to consider the supplier experience when the approach is merely tactical. Instead, we have to accept as a fact of life that we have multiple point portals spun up by different functions and then the resulting portal fatigue and the low adoption that leads to from a supplier's perspective. Another area is process design. A supplier portal strategy will encompass the mapping of end-to-end use cases. So think onboarding, data maintenance, risk checks, performance reviews, and so on, and have a plan on how to build the orchestration of them, for example, in a no-code layer, so that they can evolve quickly. This contrasts with our tactical approach, which tends to lock in static workflows that mirror the first implementation and where change requires IT projects to accomplish. Now, the all-important underlying data philosophy. A supplier portal strategy places the portal as an orchestration and UI layer. Golden supplier data remains in the supplier management backbone and is shared via APIs. What often happens with a sprawl of systems, each with their own portals, on the other hand, is that data in this case needs to be rekeyed into each portal, which creates our duplicates and sync issues that we want to avoid. Next, on KPIs, the aim is to have a shared scorecard across any function that touches supplier data, be that procurement, finance, risk, and IT, or others. And within these functions, KPIs might include percentage adoption, task cycle times, ticket reduction, or first-time write data. What often happens instead in practice is local teams might track isolated metrics, but with no aerial enterprise view. Our supplier portal strategy should support an expanding value horizon. In other words, the ability to easily scale across any use case, be that risk dashboards, ESG workflows, innovation boards, and so on, rather than the tactical approach which, it delivers quick wins, but plateaus and where new needs trigger yet another portal. And then to round off, the big one for the business case really, but total cost and cost to change. A supplier portal strategy accepts the initial outlay and resource requirements and makes a business case around that in return for no replatforming later and the ability to leverage no code to empower business users and keep future changes cheap. In the tactical approach, there is the allure of course, of that upfront lower effort, but that completely ignores rising integration, support, and supplier training costs over time, which is why the topic ends up back on the agenda. All right, we've already started to answer the question why supplier portal strategy matters, but I mentioned that we would go deeper on how to think of this in terms of business outcomes. So here we want to take a more detailed look at the metrics, key KPIs, and examples of benchmarks or targets that we might set ourselves as part of a supplier portal strategy initiative. There are numerous outcome areas we could look at, but for ease, let's take perhaps the top 6 or the most common ones, the most impactful buckets, let's say, of KPIs. So for the next section of this discussion, we'll look at supplier engagement and adoption, process speed and efficiency, cost to serve and productivity, data quality and compliance, supplier experience, and risk and performance. And in each case, we'll provide an example of metrics and KPIs to consider, why we think these matter based on experiences of our own clients, and what a target or benchmark could look like. Starting with supplier adoption and engagement then, some key metrics to define this area here could be the number of active suppliers as a proportion of the total, usage metrics such as average portal logins per supplier per quarter, or maybe task completion rates. So here we mean the percentage of suppliers that complete requested actions within a given stated timeline. Now, this is an important one, of course, because it really matters. It matters to the overall ROI benefit of our tech landscape. High adoption underpins every downstream benefit. Without it, any portal becomes just another tool. Tackling this, Mondelez, for example, set explicit internal versus external adoption KPIs, and as a result, now sees 100% internal adoption, while being able to track repeat supplier visits as a leading indicator of data freshness. So example targets might be 90% or more of strategic suppliers active and 3 or more logins per supplier per quarter, which together give us a much better view of usage and therefore value, rather than, say, a single one-off login and the supplier never returns. On process spend and efficiency, we might consider such metrics as average supplier onboarding lead time, the average cycle time for data changes or approvals, or maybe the time to first PO after registration. The benefit of this is clear to see. Shorter cycles release working capital earlier and let suppliers start delivering value faster. Again, to use the example of Mondelez, they were able to cut onboarding time by 86% after rolling out their Supplier Central portal. Here, we might want to segment our benchmarks for different supplier categories, and we'll come on to segmentation a little later, but one example might be onboarding to take less than a week for low-risk suppliers. For cost to serve and productivity, the number of supplier inquiries to the support desk is a useful metric. Here we might want to normalize the data to an average or per 100 supplier number and the number of internal tickets resolved via self-service versus non-self-service as a proportion that we want to see increasing. Another way to look at this might be the full-time equivalent, so the FTE hours saved per month. To show the impact, I have two examples here. AutoNation's portal, for instance, provided the ability to shift 4,000 supplier questions a month to self-service. And in another HICX example, BAE realized a 5-year business case within 3 months within accounts payable, and that was due to inquiry reduction. So fewer tickets, free teams for strategic work. So as part of your portal strategy and to benchmark how it's working out, you might set a target, let's say, of 30 to 50% reduction in tickets within 6 months, or whatever that may be. For data quality and compliance, again, straightforward, we want to see first-time right data accuracy increasing. We might measure the number of duplicate supplier records eliminated, or we might consider a completion rate of mandatory compliance workflows, such as ESG workflows or certificate gathering, for example. As we know, poor data creates hidden costs and risk, so Mondelez tracks data accuracy and uses validation rules in the portal to drive it up front. Ultimately, we want to see high 90s percentages for first-time right and duplicates under 0.5%, or whatever makes sense from based on your starting point. For the next area, supplier experience, of course, this is tightly related to supplier satisfaction. So there's a number of options to consider in terms of how well our portal strategy is doing here. But some examples could be supplier net promoter score, so an SNPS, or a satisfaction survey, maybe a portal usability score or digital experience index that's captured, or even metrics like average time to find key information such as invoices or POs. Now, why this matters, and we have extensive research on this on our website in the form of our supplier experience survey, but just intuitively we can say that a better experience correlates with greater customer of choice status and willingness of suppliers to innovate with you or prioritize you and deepen the relationship. So we might want to set a target of a positive SNPS of plus 30, let's say, or higher, although perhaps more valuable is tracking satisfaction over time, especially if we invest in bringing new content, new features, or new functionality to our portal. And of course, this is intertwined with the supplier engagement piece, so in a moment we'll take a closer look at this. But before we do, to round off, let's consider risk, performance, and resilience, and here we might look at the percentage of suppliers completing risk or performance scorecards in the portal, or incidents resolved through portal workflows. A key driver in this case being when suppliers regularly use the portal, you can collect richer data to predict and mitigate disruptions earlier. And we may want to target, let's say, a higher than 85% scorecard completion rate, or again, whatever makes sense based on your starting point. But as I just mentioned, adoption and engagement and how it links to supplier experience is a really key area. So before we go into the demo, let's bring this to life a little more and investigate what we might actually do with the data or the results of the metrics that we collect. So to close the loop on our strategic approach, it is only strategic if we're using it to inform how we improve our metrics over time. And just like our strategy is deliberate, so too are the underpinning strands, and we need to be clear about what we are going to do in order to improve the results that we are seeing. So I have a framework here to follow as a suggestion. Now remember, adoption on its own is just one leading metric, but if we want to measure value, such as how it impacts our business in terms of reduced inquiries, reduced cycle times, supplier doing more self-service, not just logging in, but how many things suppliers are actually doing on a self-service basis, how much are they getting done without having to ask the organization, then we need a measure of what suppliers are actually coming to our portal for. What are they doing? How long are they staying? And our expectations around this will be different depending on what type or category of supplier they are. So we recommend this feedback loop. First, we're going to want to personalize. So in other words, segment suppliers so they only see what's relevant to them. And we'll show you an example of this specifically in the demo. Next, we listen and measure, and we'll use usage data to spot friction points or drop-offs. Based on what we measure, we can adapt the experience. Best done if we can use no-code or low-code tools to make fast, targeted changes without waiting for IT. In other words, it's exactly how we would measure visitors to a website, for example, to understand how to make our website better. So just to bring that to life, it's easiest to look at an example. So here on the screen, our portal is digital, so we can see we're able to extract exactly these types of metrics to understand the dynamics of the suppliers using the portal. How many suppliers are using it? Where are our suppliers coming from? What are they visiting in our portal, and what they are clicking? All this is vital information to inform us which content, features or functionalities are having or would have an impact on the supplier experience. Or it can give us clues about where we can make adjustments to evolve and iterate our portal. But the key point is it's now based on what we know will give us the best value or the best return in terms of the effort that we put in. All right, so in terms of all that effort then, all of these stats are of course being driven by what we present to the supplier. And we're going to want to provide different suppliers with different views, features, and or content. And because they can find these features easily, that helps us to drive up engagement, which we would measure on these dashboards presented here to make sure we're getting the uptick in activity as the reward for our effort. So we'll take a look at the other side of the coin now to show how this looks in practice, because ultimately it's the supplier experience that brings this to life. For this next section then, we'll consider 3 use cases. Firstly, on the point we just made, we'll look at supplier segmentation in practice, and we'll take a simple use case of an experience tailored for a direct versus an indirect supplier user. Then we'll look at how a supplier portal can be used to support better supplier engagement. And for this, we'll use the example of enabling suppliers to share innovation concepts and ideas with you, the customer. And in the final example, we'll show how this can work the other way around. In other words, you, the customer, wants to drive an innovation campaign in which you want a selection of your suppliers to participate. So finally, before I hand over to the demo, I'll just quickly introduce 2 supplier users relevant to our first use case. In this instance, they happen to work for the same supplier organization, but they engage with the supplier in 2 ways. So we have Kim on the left, who works with the customer as a direct supplier, and so is a direct supplier user in the system, and James, who is an indirect supplier user. While these characters work at the same supplier, the same principle could apply more generally to how the views would show for a direct user at a supplier who only supplies direct, or an indirect user at a supplier who only supplies indirect. The key point is the difference in content, features and functionalities, and how that is tailored at that individual supplier user level. In other words, how we are going to use supplier segmentation to drive value. So we'll start with Kim's view first. So we'll switch to her view on the portal now, and I'll hand over to our solutions expert to walk us through what we're seeing.
Hi all, my name's Phil, and I'm part of the solution consulting team here at HICX. So this is our direct view of the system. So we've segmented, or have the ability to segment, all of the content within the portal based on your organization's segmentation of your supply base. If you only want your direct suppliers to be able to access platforms that sit within your ecosystem that are relevant to them, you can present them on any tabs or pages within your supplier experience portal. Here we can see that Kim can access the PLM system, asset management system, directly from her home page. She also has access to certain best-of-breed providers for security risks, for example. You may want our direct suppliers to be able to raise complaints about the current processes. And what we're doing here is we're driving savings, efficiencies, increasing working capital, enhancing compliance within your supply chain. Our direct suppliers might have access to best of breed technologies and help centers that you can create to support them as part of their business processes. You may want to give them access to specific reports that are only relevant to your direct suppliers. If you house data in Power BI reports and you have analytic dashboards there and you want to share them with your direct suppliers, you can absolutely do that. We can also present analytics within the portal, again, relevant just to your segmentation of suppliers. Here we have our audits overview dashboard that's relevant to your direct suppliers. And what we'll see shortly is that the indirect suppliers will not see the same content. So, summarizing, our direct supplier who's connected to your supplier experience portal has a single view of all of the content and the full relationship with your organization based on their segmentation. Every tab, every tile, every page, every report, and all the video content can be segmented by your organization based on how you segment your supply chain. Here, I've flipped over to James, who's an indirect supplier of our organization. And what we can see is that James has a different view of that same relationship. As an indirect user, he doesn't have access to any of your best of breed technologies that might be relevant to your direct suppliers. If you have indirect P2P solutions, for example, he has the ability to access those directly from his homepage or any page within the portal. He can also view any orders from that indirect P2P solution, and he can access any other platforms that are relevant to the relationship. What we can also see that's different is that he has access to fewer tabs within the portal. There's less information that we need to share with our indirect suppliers than our direct. Another great example of that is we're not presenting our Power BI reports, our direct specific reports, with our indirect suppliers. So for different suppliers, we can drive different content. And the value of this is that we can reduce delays within your supply chain. We make processes, content, and technologies visible to your relevant suppliers. We improve efficiencies by increasing productivity and lowering the resources that are required both from your side and your supplier's side. We can help you avoid spend by collaborating directly with your suppliers. We avoid additional costs associated with change management needed when engaging your supply chain. And we also increase compliance. For use case 2, I'm going to be Kim, who's a direct supplier of our organization. And for this use case, what we want to do is enable our suppliers to again engage with us more effectively and more efficiently. So Kim has new innovative packaging that she wants to share with her customer. And this packaging is on existing products. And she believes that the value of this is to reduce the carbon footprint associated with the provision of her products. She wants to be able to share innovative ideas on new solutions that are better quality, but also at a better cost and are better for our planet. So HICX enables supplier engagement to drive value associated with use cases such as innovation, collaboration, supplier relationship management, and then in addition to that, enhance supplier engagement, uptake and satisfaction. So what we've seen with some of our existing customers is that through segmentation, innovation campaigns and collaboration, some of the key value drivers there are increased profitability, increased satisfaction from suppliers and internal stakeholders, cost avoidance, so specifically associated with our use case that we're going to see today: enhanced compliance and then enhanced innovations. So if I enter the portal as Kim, what we can see that through that single supplier experience portal, we enable engagement in a number of ways. So first of all, what we're doing is allowing our supplier to engage in low value tactical communication via chatbots, for example. So if they want information about their orders, their invoices, they can ask the chatbot about that. For our use case, what Kim wants to do is provide information about, as part of an innovation campaign or standalone, about a new product that she has. With the HICX Supplier Portal, the customer here has decided to have a collaboration center. Through that collaboration center, they've enabled some key business processes using our process orchestration solution. Kim can select directly to innovate or collaborate. She can also raise help desk tickets. She can raise complaints. And then, as we said, raise innovation requests. So here, Kim has a new innovative idea associated with lower carbon packaging. Kim can enter details of that innovation. She can upload associated products. She might add URLs or links to those new products that she has, and she can justify them. These are low code forms, so you can define the criteria that you hold on these. Now, Kim can say whether that's a new product, and if it is, she's going to give details about this new product, or she can select from a list of the existing products, goods, works, or services that she provides to the business. For this case, I'm going to say that it's not a new product. It's an existing product, and the value to be realized is going to be cost savings, and also lower carbon footprint. And then she can justify that value. Now, all Kim has to do now is submit that form. Once it's submitted through our process orchestration solution, that's going to go to the key business users within Kim's customers. And they can then have a full collaboration. They might decide to go to market with a brand new innovation campaign and invite multiple suppliers, or they might decide to collaborate and innovate directly with Kim and our organization to see how they can gain additional value and or build a business case associated with this innovation. So then, driving additional engagement through the portal here, Kim can raise tickets directly within external tools if needed. She might decide to raise complaints or help tickets. And as I said, she can have innovation or collaboration projects. So any of these business processes that are driving supplier engagement can be initiated from your customer portal and or directly from the suppliers. Because it's a low-code solution, it's your decision on what you want to share with your suppliers and what processes you want to allow them to manage. So as I said, to summarize, we've seen use cases such as innovation campaigns, segmentation requests, collaboration, carbon reduction campaigns, and sustainable solution sharing.
Thank you, Phil, for those 2 use cases. Okay, so we've seen 2 use cases now in which the supplier is encouraged to go into the portal to interact with you. But now in our final part of the demo, we'll turn that around for a scenario in which you want interaction from them. I'll hand it back to Phil to explain.
In this use case, I'm going to be a direct supplier of your organization. And what we're going to see is how an internal user can engage their supply chain in innovation campaigns. Here we're going to look at a supplier innovation campaign initiated from an internal user. However, similar use cases utilizing our business process orchestration solution include supplier collaboration, supplier segmentation, and other forms of supplier relationship management. Here, I'm signed in as an internal user, and as you can see, we can hold any number of business processes within our solution. I'm going to create an innovation campaign, which is going to allow me to engage with one or multiple suppliers within my supply chain. Here, I'm going to select a single supplier. I'm going to create a campaign where we're going to look to innovate. And what we're going to try to do is request that suppliers provide information on products or services where they can help to reduce our carbon footprint. Now, as this is a low-code solution, we could add documents, further forms, information, and have complex workflows associated with these campaigns. The next stage, I'm going to sign in as my supplier. So here, I've entered the Supplier Experience Portal, and I'm signed in as Kim. Kim has been invited to the innovation campaign. Kim can open the campaign directly from a home page or from her tasks within the Supplier Experience Portal. Now, in inviting Kim to the campaign, what we're doing is enhancing supply engagement. We're allowing Kim to share relevant content. We're allowing Kim to self-serve. And we're increasing her satisfaction with the relationship with our entity and organization. So what we can see here is Kim has the information that we provided to her. She has the ability to engage and communicate with internal stakeholders via comments here. Now, Kim can say whether she's selecting a new product to innovate on, and she's going to provide details on that product and enter a value justification, or she can select an existing product. So if it's an existing product, we can have the lookup to the product list. Kim can identify the launch date of this new product, and she can enter any of the values that she sees associated with this innovation. So if we say reduced carbon footprint associated with renewable packaging, Kim can save this, share with her internal team, or she can submit the innovation request. Again, she can add further comments. And that is Kim's side of the supplier engagement. Now, using the HICX process orchestration solution and our other tools such as the Supplier Experience Portal, we can continue to engage with our supply base and realize some true value drivers associated with this. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil, for the walkthroughs there. And it's great to see how this all works in action. Okay, so to finish off, how do we embark on this journey? So regardless of whether you're currently using HICX or if you're tackling this a different way, the steps to a supplier portal strategy, and I re-emphasize strategy here, will look something like this. So step one will be to get the buy-in from the organization that we need a single portal, and stress we're not talking another AP portal, for example. We're talking about this portal of portals. Indeed, just as you have one for employees or for customers, there is no reason you shouldn't have this for suppliers. And you also need to get buy-in from IT too when it's cross-functional like this, while emphasizing to all stakeholders that a single portal will give everybody the operating scale that they need and help to drive that. Step 2 is to analyze and understand where there is supplier pain, which ultimately means it consumes our time. And this should be done across procurement, supply chain, quality, finance. Where is the pain? Is it, for example, invoice inquiries, how supply chain disruptions are managed and resolved, how certificates are collected, how information is collected for performance reviews? All this needs to be taken into account in order to complete the next step. Because now for step 3, we will segment our suppliers and map the pain points to the different segments, as these pain points impact different suppliers in different ways. For example, for AP invoice inquiries, how do the challenges vary with direct or indirect suppliers? In this example, usually it's not direct suppliers that are impacted so much. For the most part, these are automated, you have EDI and so on. So perhaps it's more of a tail spend, or even more so a middle tier supplier issue. Next, in step 4, we should launch quickly and start simple. Typically, areas like communication, messaging, and inquiry management are the easiest starting points. And start by working on those segments that are going to give the biggest returns in terms of resolving the pain points. So where we have high pain and high costs associated. And finally, step 5, we will measure and refine. As discussed, we want to look for where we measure usage rather than pure adoption alone. There is always the danger of focusing too much on adoption. In other words, how often do suppliers log in? But this isn't a great measure on its own, as shown earlier. And then with that data, think about what makes sense to add in, for example, in terms of content or functionality, and that adds value. And finally, not on the list, but super important point is the data point. All this will be significantly enhanced if you have your supplier data in order. There are many ways to do that data aspect, and you'll see on the HICX website lots of information on this topic, or do feel free to contact us for a conversation on this. But having said that, it's not a requirement to move forward with this. It's not a blocker, and is indeed something which could even get done in parallel. All right, so thank you everybody for taking the time out today to learn more about this topic. And of course, we'd love to continue the conversation with you. So do reach out to us if you want to explore any of these areas in more detail, and we'd be happy to have that discussion with you. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of day. And until next time, goodbye.